Hi, and welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. I'm the host of the podcast where we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. My guest today is Scott Tinker, the chairman of the Switch On Alliance. Hi, Scott. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Robert. Good to be here.
So, Scott, you have a long resume. You also have an affiliation with the University of Texas. I could introduce you, but as our custom on this podcast is to have guests introduce themselves. So if you don't mind, please, who are you and why are you on this podcast?
Well, I'm a dad, father of four.
There you go.
and a husband. So those are my big jobs. Email expert, Robert, these days, and I do pretty well in PowerPoint. A lot of practice there. So done a little bit on energy, but I'm a professor at UT Austin and started a little 501c3 a few years back called the Switch Energy Alliance, and we make energy educational films and film-based materials. So that's my night job, and find it to be a lot of fun.
So, and today we're going to talk about your new film, the Switch On, which came out earlier this year. That's one of the things we want to talk about. But this is your second documentary. So you've been working at this. The first one came out, Switch came out in 2012. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
So you've been working at this for 8 years as an educational project. Is that a fair way to categorize it?
Yeah. So Harry Lynch is the filmmaker, and he's my partner in all things Switch. And we made the film Switch, released in 12, but we started filming in 9 and 10, 11 countries, and 20 site visits and 50 interviews. And you know, you've made a film on energy. It's a big deal. It was in post-production for a year, and we finally got it down to Switch and released it in 2012. It was a lot more popular than we thought. You know, it's been 50 countries. I think we've passed about 15 million viewers now on that, and mostly colleges and high schools and that kind of thing. So I went off and continued to babble about energy, and Harry was doing important things. He was making another series on mental health. And I realized we'd kind of left off, Robert, about a third of the world in our first film, the part of the world that doesn't have much energy or much access to energy. So we got back together. I formed a 501c3, the Switch Energy Alliance, and we made the film Switch On. Again, 3 years in filming and producing it, and we released that right at the time of COVID. So, you know, timing is everything.
Always a good moment, right?
It is. Yeah. But we filmed that in Ethiopia and Kenya, Nepal, Vietnam, and Colombia. So 5 countries across the developing world and the undeveloped world. And it's very different style, very different approach than Switch, but I think pretty powerful.
And so now I've watched the film. I've seen it a couple times. I've reviewed it. So what's your primary takeaway, and what do you want people to learn from the film? What was your objective with the second documentary?
Yeah, you know, there are a lot of takeaways. Some are more apparent, and some are, I think, a bit more subtle, just like anything in energy. But I think the biggest thing is how much energy affects modern societies. Most of us take it for granted. You and I aren't doing this if we don't have access to energy, affordable, available, reliable energy. You know, when you have 1 billion people in the world without electricity still today, and another couple billion or more cooking with dirty fuels, and it just it's a playing field that disadvantages about a third of the world. And you say, well, okay, so homes and food and education and clothing and that kind of thing, to be sure, but it affects everyone. You know, there are just so many big issues in the world today when people don't have that kind of access. So you look at the rights and freedom of women who are going for water and cooking indoors with biomass and don't get to go to schools when the male counterparts do, or things like, you know, fertility rates, to be completely candid, are directly tied to education. I mean, tightly tied to education. Education depends on modern energy in schools that have lights in them, and homes that have lights in them, and access to books. And
so you talk about in one of your lectures, you talk about the difference between clean energy and dirty energy, and that's one of the things that phrase, especially clean energy, is thrown around a lot in the United States in talking about policy. Is that distinction in your mind? Is that a very clear one? Is there something, can we definitively say, well, this is clean? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, I've given 800 lectures in 60 countries. and I've probably said in almost all of them, I don't know what clean means, or dirty, or good or bad, or these kind of false choices that are presented, renewables or fossil fuels. We're painted a picture often in the public that there's this black and white set of choices which really don't exist. So clean, I don't use it. I try not to use it. I probably said it many times, but I try my best to talk about the actual impacts of things. So if we're talking about atmospheric emissions, CO2 and methane and other greenhouse gases, we talk about what kind of things we do with energy that produce those. Talk about local air emissions as we do in Switch On, that's a whole different set of things. Cooking with biomass or wood or dung. If we talk about the land use, that's a completely different environmental impact, whether it's mining or manufacturing or landfill disposal, impact to water systems, etc. So clean, the environmental pillars are atmosphere, air, land, and water. Those are the four pillars of the environment. And no form of energy is perfect by any means. They all have impacts on the environment. They're just different. And that's one of the great challenges, I think, with education and energy today is we seem to have this objective function of climate only, at least in the United States and Western Europe, when in fact there's so much more to the environment than that. And we have to try to minimize impacts on all forms of the environment. So clean to me means minimizing impacts on all forms of the environment, and we have to have the right balance of energy, the portfolio of energy to do that.
Sure. So you in going, you talked about the different places that you went, and I've done a little travel as well. Why do you think that the public, especially, and we talked, following up on this clean energy, why is in the U.S. and in Europe the captivation of renewables so strong? Why is that idea, do you think, so strong in the public's imagination that allows the polls showing 70% of people like wind, 80% want more solar versus coal and nuclear, coal and oil, et cetera? Why do you think that idea of renewables is so powerful?
Well, it's been linked closely to clean. So the thought of renewable energy, something that when you say the word, it means it can happen over and over again. And the sun is there for a long time. I'm a geoscientist. When it's not, we have a different set of problems. but wind blows, and it blows in places that are reasonably predictable and steady. So the sun and the wind are renewable, at least in terms we talk about. But the stuff to capture them, you have to have wind turbines and solar panels, and because it's intermittent, not sunny or windy all the time, you have to have backup, whether it's a power plant or a battery, and those aren't renewable either. So all the materials that we mine and manufacture and back up intermittent energy with, none of that's renewable. So this concept of renewable energy has been linked to clean, but we need to unlink that. We need to actually look at it and say, hey, it has impacts too. They're different. Atmospherically at the source, better. Land and nature, not so good. And that's one of the great challenges, I think, of education, is just thinking beyond that. Every time I say those exact words to anyone, they say, wait a minute, I haven't thought about it that way. Why hadn't somebody said that to me? I feel a little duped. but that's okay. It's just a little bit more complex than A to C. There's actually a B in there that you have to think about. And we could take it, on a broader scale. If you think about the environment, where's the cleanest air in the world? Where it's rich. Where are the soils the least polluted? Where it's rich. Where can I drink the water out of the tap? Where there's wealth. So you see this over and over again, is healthy economies can afford to invest in the environment and the environmental cleanup and the regulation to enforce that.
But they need energy to get rich.
They need energy. So there's the triangle: energy, the economy, the environment, that little waltz that goes on, as you well know, and I've talked about forever, is very real. You can't circumvent or leave one of those parts out. It just doesn't work. So the 65 countries I've been in, without exception, the worst environments are where it's poor. They can't afford to think about even, much less to do the kinds of environmental things that wealthy countries do. So energy, the economy, the environment, that's a very powerful waltz. And you can start to, it's a virtuous cycle. You start to see the cleanup going on as you get energy and wealth. It's really powerful.
So let me ask you then about oil, because I've said, why are renewables so attractive in terms of the public's mind? But oil, and I mean, the oil industry has been demonized now for decades. I've followed, I've written about this going back to the 40s, right? And inevitably the oil companies are painted as big and bad, and they knew about climate change. They stopped all this. It seems a little facile. How you've been working in geosciences? You're a PhD geologist, right? You worked in the oil industry before you were at UT. Why is that that idea of the oil business as bad, as powerful as the idea that renewables are good?
Yeah, well, the oil industry hasn't done itself any favors through the years. Let's be candid. It it didn't exactly try to paint a good social image of itself necessarily, and when it did, people didn't respond to it well. So it was the largest industry through the years, and there are philosophies that just don't like big industry. Now, there are some really remarkable interactive graphs now that show ExxonMobil floating around as a representative of, quote, big oil. And it's been this high market cap for decades. And all of a sudden, as you come into this decade, it just goes off the map. And you see, Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Facebook just go, whoa. I just read an article yesterday. Jeff Bezos' personal wealth has grown $40 billion since April. Grown $40 billion personally since April. Right. From 110 to 150 billion. The richest guy around. And guess what? Bill Gates is in there, and Larry Ellison, and a lot of other folks as well. So big industry is no longer oil. And interestingly enough, big oil isn't really ExxonMobil. When you start to think about the Aramcos and the PetroChinas and the state oil companies of the world who are still actively developing oil and gas resources, buying them around the world. And that's who is going to produce and develop oil and gas if the capitalist society's oil and gas companies go under. So careful what you ask for. You might just get it.
So those state-owned, it's right. So that's the one obvious thing that's happened is the majors, the super majors in the U.S. have been decreasing in value because of this. As I put it, the oil and gas industry has been incredibly good over the last decade at reducing the cost of oil and gas to consumers, but terrible at making money for itself. So does that, and I read something just this morning. Well, this is the end of fossil fuels is at hand. Tell me what we'll come back to switch on in just a minute, but just your view on this. So what's your outlook for the oil and gas sector in broadly, but more specifically in the United States?
Yeah, and let me just treat fossil fuels this way. Fossil fuels are coal and oil and natural gas, and then there's some other things in there as well, but coal is just all carbon. It's been around a long time. Now, it post-dates, it turns out, wind. We've had windmills pumping up water, and it post-dates solar, which grew hay for horses in our vehicles prior to coal coming along, which is a denser form of energy, and you write about that. Density matters. Along comes coal, but it's all carbon. It's fossil fuel. Then oil, complex hydrocarbon chains, and that was great because it's liquids. You could put it into not just lamps as kerosene, but into vehicles now and combust it. And that's really dense, and that changed our transportation systems. And then natural gas, which methane is one carbon, 4 hydrogen, CH4, propane, butane, pentane, whatever, pick your favorite natural gases, mostly hydrogen. These are hydrogen fuels. So all fossil fuels aren't the same. Hydrocarbon is hydrogen in the methane side of the world. And so you say oil and gas, but they're really different industries now. In fact, natural gas is being discovered and produced in places without oil. And that's changing the landscape. So you start to see a whole suite of resource opportunities in methane globally that broaden the distribution of power and who has access to it. And it's a remarkably diverse fuel. I can make electricity with it by combusting it and boiling water, making steam turbine. I can cook with it directly. Most of us do, unless you've been regulated and told you can't put natural gas in your home anymore. Go figure. I use it for products of all kinds. It's very versatile for that, et cetera. It's just It's a remarkable fuel in many ways, and it's one of the best fuels to back up wind and solar, which have their place, to be sure. I'll talk about that in a minute, but how do you follow that intermittency? The best way is have something you can light quickly and follow that load. So I don't light charcoal in my kitchen for a reason other than the smoke. It takes forever to get it going, but I can fire up a gas burner and have heat like that faster than electricity.
Sure.
And I can turn it off. So natural gas has this remarkable use as a fossil fuel that the world recognizes. It's just some of us in Western Europe.
And the supplies are abundant and distributed all over the world.
And so, yes, and if you start to think about vehicles now, we have the internal combustion engine, we have a battery electric vehicle, which is being heavily pushed. Where are we going to get all the materials for those batteries? And just math matters. You like to count, I like to count. Electrify half of them, like Bloomberg forecast says we're going to do. Let's say 600 million by 2040, which is that forecast. 600 million. Now, how many batteries is that? Not vehicles, batteries. So a Tesla S, the big, beautiful sedan, has 7,000 cell phones in a car equivalent. Now, do some math. 600 million times whatever, 5,000 per car is 3 trillion new batteries, Robert. And 3 trillion new batteries, that's orders of magnitude more than we produce today. Where are we going to get all that stuff? It turns out we're going to get it from China. And not just China itself, but from the resources that China has purchased around the world, who are buying up a lot of the mining and rare earth elements and metals and other kinds of things that it takes to make batteries. So our transportation system, which was dependent on liquids and OPEC for a while, less so now, will be dependent on a different part of the world. And that's why hydrogen is so fascinating, because it's broadly distributed, and you get it in different ways. It doesn't float around. It's element number one, so it doesn't float around out there. It's very light, but you get it from splitting a water molecule or splitting the methane molecule. Energetically, a little better to split methane than water, takes less energy. So that's pretty cool when you think about a fuel cell. Oh wait, maybe we can have zero emissions vehicles that function like our combustion engines do from hydrogen. And that's powerful. So yeah,
we get around the battery problem, some of the battery problems. We don't get around with fuel cells have rare have minerals in them as well, but that idea of natural gas going beyond combustion systems and into a fuel cell system as a future possibility. But
that's it. And your only product is water. The only combustion product, so to speak, it's not combustion. The only product from that fuel cell is water. Charge it at night. Don't drive that far. Smaller, quiet, no emissions. Hydrogen fuel cells, and then combustion engines as well. And I like that. I like the idea of optionality or a portfolio of choices. That makes good sense. So I think what's happening in energy education is we're kind of focusing on one thing and calling it good or clean or right. And in fact, it isn't. It has components that are those things, but it's that portfolio that matters.
Is it fair then to say that one of your objectives in the film and in what you're doing educationally is to make people appreciate the complexity of the systems that are energy and power systems? Is that fair?
It is. It's to simplify the complexity, though, because although it's there technologically, what we need to understand as people isn't that complex. It's difficult, but we can do it. We can simplify it to a point where we say, oh, sure, that makes sense. It's not black and white, but it's certainly solvable. And that's what we're trying to do with our films, is show people those different choices, and they're all rigorously reviewed, peer-reviewed by technical people. So you can fact-check anything we produce, unlike many documentaries out there, as you know, that don't stand up very well to fact-checking. Right. They're shocking, but they aren't necessarily true. So you go through our materials, and that's what we're trying to do, is just get students and educators and then the broad policymakers and public some materials they can look at and understand and say, oh, that makes sense. It's a little bit more complex, but certainly solvable. And that's our whole mission, is to inspire an energy-educated future. That's the mission of the Switch Energy Alliance, just inspire an energy-educated future so we can do things differently.
Sure. So bringing more rigor to the thinking about energy, I guess you'd say, to an energy educated future that is objective, nonpartisan, and sensible. That's your slogan. So let's get back to the film, because this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the podcast. What was the hardest part of this project?
For Switch On, it was really thinking about what we wanted to show and film, and then getting access to it in a way that didn't go kind of, oh, look at all the poor people, and here's all the rich people, because that's not the reality. Hans Rosling's beautiful book called Factfulness shows this. There's not this and that, we and them, it's this gradation. And that's what we are trying to show. And as you know, in a film, you only have so many minutes and so many choices that you can make. In the edit suite, everything just comes out of it. So it's really reducing it to a story that would highlight the three big components: indigenous, off the grid, let's call it rural, so lack of access to energy, no pipelines, no roads, no wires. You got to have distributed something to start. Solar makes a lot of sense, pico hydro, micro wind turbines, etc. So there's that part. That's about 1 billion people. And then under the grid, so slums. We filmed in Kibra outside of Nairobi, one of the largest slums in Africa. And showing wires over there, but we can't get them here, or we can't afford it here. And when they come here, there's cartels that take it and steal it, and that electrocutes people and kids and cats and other things. And so just the whole challenge of corruption that goes on getting access to energy, another 1 billion people. And then finally cooking.
But just to bring you back, so that the hardest part was just deciding how you were gonna focus the film. Is that
capturing it in a way? Yeah, what things to focus, and then capturing it in a way that was both human and also showed the scale and the magnitude of this challenge.
Yep.
It's not just a few poor people over there that live in Africa and we see them in National Geographic every day. It's everywhere, Robert. We have it here in the United States of America, where you and I both live. Some of the reservations and even parts of Texas that don't have reliable electricity in their homes still today. Now, it's concentrated in parts. So it's really trying to show the scale of those numbers in a very digestible human way. And I think we did it. We accomplished it. But boy, it took iteration after iteration. Thank you for participating in one of those screenings and Q&As and the things you do, and you go back to the drawing board and don't overwhelm with numbers, but show enough to show the scale of that challenge and then why it affects all of us. So it's telling a story. Anytime with a film, it's telling a story that is interesting, human, but also rigorous enough to show why this matters to the world. And this challenge, when you have 3 million people every single year dying of breathing smoke in their own homes, 3 million people, Robert. COVID so far has killed about 750,000 people globally. So a quarter of what die every year from breathing smoke in their own homes. That's more than malaria and AIDS combined. And that is so solvable.
And yet that number is yet little known. It's not a number that most people know, or even the idea of indoor air pollution is just foreign to them.
Yes, and it is foreign. Who knew?
Yep.
Yet it's like smoking a pack or two of cigarettes every day for these kids. We went to the CD Memorial Hospital in Nepal, and
so you beat me to it. One of the most affecting parts of your film was that visit to the CD Memorial Hospital in Bhaktapur in Nepal, and seeing this child, I guess a young girl, maybe 2-3 years old, that looked like she had pneumonia, was coughing the whole time. That was a very powerful moment, because it was a very human moment and brought home that idea of indoor air pollution. I assume that still sticks with you, that scene.
It does. We were shooting 2 cameras in that little checkup room, but in the lobby right outside where we'd spent time, there were like 50 kids like that. And I'd spent time all week with Sanu Kanchi and her 5 kids, so I was coming in pretty raw. I thought we were doing a 2-camera shoot on the doctor and the infant and the mother, and it was tough for me. I just, it's so easy to solve and to watch this going on. I didn't know a camera was on me, but it was a pretty emotional moment, and we went up then to follow her into the ward where the kids were, and they're losing kids every week there from pneumonia, from respiratory, and the mothers from cancer and cataracts and other things. We have some that are solvable right now today, and without that much investment from governments and communities.
So that problem that you saw though in Nepal, this problem of indoor air pollution, could just a lot of butane stoves, propane stoves, how easily could this be solved?
It's getting solved. That was one of the coolest things there is most of the homes now are getting an LPG canister in there and cooking with gas on their cooktop. And then we featured biogas, which you can make locally. The induction cooktops are electric in the home as well. So it's all very solvable. You can't have centralized power everywhere, but that's why you get your LPG or your biogas systems, or in some cases supplemented with lights from solar and DRE and other kinds of things. So it's a very solvable system. It would have an immediate effect, and it's global. And that's part of the challenge of shining a light on these things so we can act on those things that will have an immediate and major impact today.
But when you say that, one of the things that in my own experience in thinking about these global issues is that, well, what can I do? I mean, we can be educated about problems in Nepal, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, Colombia, all around the world. But I hesitate to use the word powerless, but what is it beyond being educated about this that we can do? I mean, how much capability is there for us to affect those kinds of energy shortages in these other countries?
Yeah. So a couple approaches that have been taken. One is the aid-based approach. And there are lots of organizations bringing first electricity to places in the world. We did it. We did it in Colombia and Gunchukwu. We brought first solar. That's what they asked for. 3.5 kilowatt array. Powered up a few mud huts, ceiling fans in one of them, and a refrigerator freezer. It helps. But it's aid-based. We paid for all of it. Is it lasting? Can be, but they have to have mechanisms. They have to grow with that energy, their own economies, to generate some revenue above what they have to maintain that system. Not always easy. And then there's the approaches where the investments are made at the request of the community in the ways they want them, not the way I want it, the way they want it. And you put investments into whatever systems it is that's going to begin to change their local economic systems. So that becomes a self-sustaining cycle then of growing from seeds of cultural and socioeconomic power points in those communities. That's the kind of investments I think that governments and industries and aid-based organizations can make that are different from pure aid. So it's not necessarily instant or fast, but with cell phone technology, it goes a lot faster than you and I might think. Certainly faster than I thought it could in many places. Once it takes off, it really starts to launch.
So the developing world can, as you say, put these seeds out there, but the local communities, local governments, the national governments, they're going to have to be the ones that make this happen. We can't impose that, right? And isn't that one of the difficult things? I mean, you wrote about this in Kenya. The corruption is a key problem. Is that fair?
It's corruption everywhere, Robert. That is probably the largest problem inhibiting this globally. It's autocracies, usually in impoverished countries or parts of countries. And so how do you get the corruption at all levels out? In Ethiopia, they took a different approach. It wasn't distributed renewables. It was a big dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. This is 16,400 megawatt generators, 6.4 gigs. It's 10 to 12,000 2-megawatt wind turbines after capacity factors. This is a crazy amount of electricity. It'll light up half of Ethiopia, 50 million people initially. Now, it was sole sourced. It went to an Italian dam maker. There was no competitive bid. You go, oh, well, you think a little graft is going on there? Of course it is. And you got to digest this and say, but here's electricity. And then the politics kicking in, that was on the Blue Nile, flowing north, meets the White Nile, becomes the Nile River into eventually, flowing out of Egypt. And you see in Cairo, the reaction to that continues to be negative. Initially, they threatened to bomb it. The balance of power in North Africa has been disrupted because Ethiopia has leaned in and said, we're going to use our water for our people. So this is creating conversations that didn't exist before. So yeah, corruption, autocracies, you start to get power, you start to get educated, people have opinions, they want to vote. And so, yeah, it's not that popular in places when you've had it pretty good if you're the autocrat.
Right.
It changes the balance of power.
Sure. So I want to remind the people who are listening and watching. So your Switch Energy Alliance, switchon.org is your website?
Yes.
So people can go there and they can watch your new film for free, right? If they register and sign up for a time. Tell us how to do that.
Yeah, you just go onto the website and you don't even have to sign up. You just stream it. Log in and stream it and switch on. You can see Switch as well. And then we have over 300 other short format films of different kinds, expert interviews and site visits and primers and 101s. We have the Switch Energy Lab, which is the goofy white lab coat, me doing experiments. We're about to put up 7 episodes from Switch On, 20 to 30 minutes each, deeper in the stories. They're finished. I was just finalizing the voiceover for those, the last touches. They're really cool. Take you deep into Vietnam and look at the coal story. Why coal in Vietnam and every place else? We go deeper into Kibra and look at the corruption. A lot of interviews that we couldn't put in the film. I go back to Kenya Power and interview the head of security. What's going on there? And interview the guy that's fixing the illegal connections. 2 parts in Gunchukwu. What's it really take to bring solar? 3.5 kilowatts, probably half of what you have on your house.
It is. I was just going to interrupt there. I have 8.5 kilowatts on the roof of my house here in Austin. So for 3.5 kilowatts is not very much.
Yeah. So these episodes are great. And then we've got something I want to mention called Switch Classroom. We've been working on this for 2 years now. There's a class taught in the United States called AP Environmental Sciences, APES for short. In APES, about 5,000 teachers teach over 200,000 kids every year. Very popular AP science class. About 1 month of that year-long course is energy. And those teachers have been using Switch materials, our energy lab and our short format stuff, our primer stuff, and even watching the film Switch. So we developed a platform to serve videos and curriculum, questions, multiple choice and short answer with the teachers. And now instead of an energy textbook that candidly has been quite terrible in the past, they can serve this online and these students will be exposed to objective, nonpartisan pros and cons of all forms of energy. So we finished. It's rolling out now. It's live. We've had 500 teachers already sign up to use it in classrooms across the country. We're very excited about it. It's just trying to get nonpartisan energy materials into the hands of teachers and their students for years to come. Switch Classroom. And
is that available through switchon.org as well?
It is, Robert. It's right there, and it's free, like everything we do.
Great. So just a few more questions then, Scott. So, and how did you get all this paid for? How did you make this work?
Yeah, I raised the money. That battery in Gunchukwu, my wife and I paid for when we were down there filming. So it's individuals, it's foundations, it's corporations, it's just a suite of people who, they don't have any creative control, they don't have any editorial control, they don't see the things till they go public. But they just want to invest in objective energy education. There's a whole suite of different sources of funds that way.
And about how much money have you raised?
Oh boy. For all of the things I've talked about, and I haven't finished, I have one more I want to tell you about $4 to $5 million for the last 4 years. So, it's expensive to make high quality stuff, but remarkably affordable when you think about the impact. The last thing I'll mention quickly is a film we made for museums. It's just 5 minutes long, and it shows without voice at all why energy matters in our lives. It follows two middle school kids get off a school bus. I'm the cameo bus driver. And they walk home, and they're going to their house, and everything's disappearing behind them. And they get in the kitchen and grab a sandwich, glass of water. They're on their phone watching TV, and everything's disappearing. And then it disappears from them, and their home disappears, and they're there in their skivvies in a field. They were actors. Their parents were there. It was okay. You know? So then we go through the full cycle chain that it takes globally to bring clothing. You see cotton being grown and combined and transported and woven into fabric and then into clothes and moved to clothing stores, and we go buy it and it comes to your house. Just what it takes to get clothes to you, and energy all along the way. And the same for wood to build your home, and the same for clean water, and the same for the electronics that we all use and listen to. And it goes quickly all over the world, international languages. And at the end of 5 minutes, it loops right back, and things reappear on them. The house reappears, and the TV, and the cell phone, and the water glass, and the sandwich. And you're going, oh, wow. There's energy in everything in our modern lives, everything. So that's going to be in big energy halls and museums, and hopefully on the front end of IMAX, Houston Museum of Natural Science, Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We're visiting with Smithsonian now. But any museum who wants to show that film, and again, free.
Well, it's ambitious, Scott. It's a remarkable project. So congratulations to you. So two last things, the questions I like to ask. So what books are you reading? I know you're in Michigan now. You're somehow able to avoid the Texas heat, which makes me a little envious. But what are you reading these days?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm embarrassed to say this. I just finished reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I think it was again. I'll say again, but I don't remember it. So, I wandered my way through that, and I guess I was glad that I did it. But it was Robert Persic. It was an interesting set of philosophies there. But I kind of trade back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. I finished Factfulness, which is a great read. I would encourage lots of people to take a look at that, Hans Rosling's book. I like it so much because it's 10 big trends in the world that are better than you think. And it goes back to what we were talking about, Robert. We think things are so bad, but when you look at the data, not the models, the data, the actual empirical data, the trends are good on so many things in the world. There's still work to be done, to be sure, but it's much better than we think. From natural disasters, we're way better off than we think we are on that, and poverty, reduction of poverty. He speaks strongly to that, and many other things that are just, I think, fascinating. He passed away near the end of it, and his son and daughter-in-law finished writing that, Hans Rosling's book. I go back and forth, lots of stuff.
Well, so maybe that ties in then to the last question I want to ask. So, and maybe you've already answered it. So what gives you hope? I mean, you've been looking at these issues for energy focused issues for a long time, but I'm not necessarily asking for you to focus on the energy part of this, but what you look around, you've been doing, been involved in public policy and these kinds of issues. What gives you hope as you look at the future?
Yeah, boy, when I've traveled around the world, it's the young people. And I'm not talking about the young people necessarily in the U.S. or Western Europe that make the news a lot in, whatever forms of social media. I'm talking about the young people in Kibra, in Gunchukwa, in Nairobi, in Nepal, in Kathmandu, and other places that they're seeing their future and they're optimistic about it. They have very little, but they see a future in which education is going to matter to them. They're immersed in it. They want to learn and grow and then bring what we call the American dream, the next generation better than themselves, to their families. As that happens, and it is, that's going to be very powerful. That lifts the world up. Right now, we've just been pulling it farther and farther apart with a group stuck. That lifts the world along in a way that never has happened before, at least in modern time. So I'm really hopeful about that happening, and I hope it encourages us in the developed world then to continue to invent and look to the future and work on building things, positive things. And so that's what gives me hope, is just a broader cross-section of people coming up to the, the life that you and I have been privileged to be born into.
Well, that's a great ending to this discussion, Scott. So my guest, Scott Tinker, Dr. Scott Tinker, the chairman of the Switch Energy Alliance, the head of the Bureau of Economic Geology at UT Austin. His Switch Energy Alliance, you can find it at switchon.org. And thanks for listening to the Power Hungry podcast. If you like what we've been talking about, go to ratethispodcast.com/Power Hungry and give us 5, 6, 12 stars, whatever you feel like. And tune in for subscribe to the podcast. But we'll be back next week with another edition of the Power Hungry podcast. Thank you, Scott, for being with us. And thanks all of you for listening.
Thank you, Robert.